Hey guys, it's Mrs. New here. This is the final video in the series about the Drape Bowl Project, or the kind of hexagon bowl here. And now in the project is when I'm ready to carve. So I went ahead and just went on Google Images and found an image that I liked. And then I traced that image. I just used a black Sharpie marker and I traced that image onto a piece of this tracing paper. Now, potentially you're like, well, why don't you just use this one to poke through? I like using the tracing paper better because if your engobe is tacky or sort of sticky still, the tracing paper is less likely to stick to your engobe. So I do like using a black Sharpie. And again, when you're searching for images, I would maybe do an image search with the word stencil. That way you get more shapes rather than lines. So now is this time when I'm going to go ahead and start poking this design. Now mine's been sitting in a bag for, honestly, it's been more than a day. So it's getting past that leather hard state onto the bone dry state. But what I want to do, mine's actually not sticking very well either. So I'm just going to go ahead and poke through the design here. So make sure it's nice and centered. Things that are kind of more round work well for this, and I'm just going to poke right through that tissue paper, and things that have shapes as well as lines. So you can see when I used my Sharpie here, I made some of these lines thicker, and that way I have some areas that I'm going to carve out. Now there's different ways to do carving on these bowls. You could carve out the background and then just leave the shape of the object. But for me, I like to just sort of carve out a design. So I'm going to go ahead and poke through my tissue paper, my tracing paper right onto the bowl. If you're doing this part and it's really sticking really badly, then you might speed up the drying process just a little bit by using a hair dryer. They're in the drawer that says hair dryers. And you could speed up the drying process by blowing it dry for just a couple minutes before you begin the tracing. But remember, day one is sort of cutting out your shape and adding the foot. Day two is applying your engobe, then it goes back in a bag. So technically I'm on day 3 of this assignment. And when you put it back in the bag, you don't want to add wet paper towels because you want it to get more leather hard so that you can do this part. So I'm going pretty fast here for the sake of the demo, but you can kind of get the idea of what I'm doing here. I'm just sort of poking all the designs and the shapes, and then I'm going to start to carve. So for the sake of the demo, I'm going to go ahead and lift this up, and let's kind of figure out what I'm going to carve here. So it's a little tricky with the way I poked it, but that's why it's important to keep your original around. And then for this, you want to use the baby loop tool. So find a couple with some different tips, because you might end up using, you might end up liking this particular one, or maybe you need sort of a round shape. And then I am going to start with just the lines of the design, and I'm going to carve through that engobe. So it should come off kind of like an apple peel, right? And it should just kind of flake away. Now for cleanup of this particular project, when you clean up, it's important that you don't put these little shavings into like the slop bucket that has all of the rest of the clay into it. It's important that you just put them in the garbage can, because they do have that colorant, that engobe on them, and so we don't want that to sort of affect the rest of the clay that we're using in the class. So I'm going to kind of reference my photo here again. So notice I'm using the loop tool. I'm not using a needle tool. A needle tool is not going to give you a big enough line. So it's really important that the smallest line that you get is kind of this edge of this baby loop tool. Okay, and it also is important that you're thinking about, carving out some areas that are more like shapes that you're carving out as well as lines. So this part takes a while, as you can see. Putting it on a banding wheel is kind of helpful so that you can kind of spin it around while you're working. If you want a thinner line than that baby loop tool, my other suggestion would be, let me grab one, would be just a #2 pencil that's nice and sharp. So like, let's say right here, this is kind of a smaller line. At the very least, you want to use that #2 pencil, right? So that'll give you a little bit bigger of a mark than the needle tool. So don't use the needle tool for carving. So I would just keep going on this, and I would eventually have my design all carved. All these little flakes, you can use a dry paintbrush, kind of helps to kind of flake them away, or just kind of use your finger if it's not too, if your envelope's not too sticky. Very last steps I would want to do is maybe add a border. So I like to just do kind of a simple border around. Sometimes what I'll do is in the corners, if you take the round loop tool and you just spin it in a circle, it will give you a little dot. So sometimes I kind of mark my corners and then, you know, come up with a simple kind of border. So let me mark my corners and kind of show you what I mean. So if I was going to go from here to here, maybe it's just a matter of sort of a dashed line, or maybe, so I could kind of go just do something like this, right? Could be really simple, but I do like to put a border on the edge of my ongo bowls. I just think it makes it look a little nicer. So play around with the border, and then very last thing would be to sign the bottom. So they do kind of all look the same, and so you would definitely want to take something, probably a sharp pencil would work well, and go ahead and, you know, add your mark. And of course, I always like to put the year on mine, because, you know, someday you can look back at this and be like, oh, I was junior in high school when I made this project. So I hope that you guys enjoy this ongo bowl and take your time with your carving and just have fun. And I will see you for the next project. Thanks. Have a great day. Bye.